Let's talk about 3 myths regarding African slavery. The reason this is important is because if you've ever brought up the transatlantic slave trade to an American or European, often you'll hear things like, oh, Africans sold their own people, or things like, for instance, oh, slavery was always practiced in Africa. And often these comments are pretty much made to kind of justify the transatlantic slave trade because the idea is Africans were equally responsible for it. And I want to debunk that. So let's look at a couple of things first of all. The first myth I want to talk about is the idea that Africans sold their own people. And this is actually quite laughable because, yes, obviously Africans did sell other Africans, but there was no Pan-African identity at the time. Saying Africans sold their own people is not true because what was done is certain groups would capture members of another group and sell those people. Still absolutely horrendous, but saying that they sold their own people is kind of like saying when Germany invaded Austria or invaded Russia, Germany was invading itself. It was invading its own people because, you know, all these people are European. But of course, we recognize that Germany, Austria, and Russia are separate groups and that we don't use that kind of language. So why do we use it when it comes to Africans that are of many different groups? Africans did not sell their own people. They did not sell like their family members or friends or anything like that. They sold others from other groups, which is horrible, but that is just simply a lie that they sold their own people. The second thing I also want to talk about is this idea that all the slave trade that was being done by that the Africans were selling, all the slaves that the Africans were selling, was completely voluntary. And in the book Black Marxism by Walter Rodney points out that, yes, of course, there was a time period where different African groups were willingly selling slaves to Europeans, but at a certain point, when they tried selling anything else, cash crops or even light manufacturing, Europeans refused to buy these products because they didn't want any competition with their domestic markets. The Europeans pretty much imposed these unequal trade relations where Africa would have to continue to sell slaves even if they didn't want to. So, you know, not all of this was done voluntarily. Often it was done under pressure in unequal trade relations between Europeans and Africans. And the third thing I want to talk about is just this idea that, like, you know, slavery was always practiced in Africa. First of all, not all societies did it. But the other thing is also is where slavery was done is never been done to the extent that slavery was done in Brazil or the American South. It was not hereditary, for instance, for the most part. It was not as grueling for the most part. Some slaves, for instance, could rise in rank and actually be able to buy their freedom. And again, slavery is horrible, but it was never, no African economy was as dependent on slaves as the so-called New World was. So there you go. Those are some myths I want to debunk regarding African slavery. Let me know if you've heard any other myths in the comments and what you think of this. Thank you so much.